Hi, I'm Mark and I'm taking a break from my usual reverse geocaching videos to instead theorise about the Stormlight archive. So, here's a question. Will the Stormlight archive appear in the Stormlight archive? This might sound silly, and to be fair, it's not meant to be a 100% super serious question, but it is one that I find interesting. And if you haven't read any Stormlight or all of Stormlight, don't worry, I'm not giving any plot or character spoilers in this. But if you're very, very sensitive to spoilers, I will be revealing something out of world about the titles of the books that you'll probably figure out in part 2 of Way of Kings anyway. So maybe you might want to learn that yourself, but really, for all intents and purposes, this can be considered a spoiler-free video. Part 1. There are many things that I like about the Stormlight books, but one thing in particular is a very, very small aspect. We see it in, as I mentioned, part 2 of The Way of Kings, when we hear about The Way of Kings, which is weird. So, this is what I like. The books we read have names which come from books which exist in the world of those books. The Way of Kings is a book written by Brandon Sanderson, but in The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, there exists a book called The Way of Kings, written by a historical king known as Nohadon. So The Way of Kings that we know is named after a book in its own world, which is just meta and cool to me. And if you're familiar with the series, you probably know that this trend continues throughout. With Words of Radiance, this is a little different. There is an in-world Words of Radiance, but that wasn't always intended to be the title of the second Stormlight book. The working title for Words of Radiance, the Brandon Sanderson one, not the in-world one, was the Book of Endless Pages. The Book of Endless Pages does show up in the story as a text that's important to the Varan religion, but Brandon ultimately decided not to use this as the title for a very long fantasy book, which, to be fair, I think was a good call. It would have been really low-hanging fruit for anyone who wanted to critique the length of the book, but then it went on to be one of the highest rated books on Goodreads, so joke's on them, I guess. So in its place, Words of Radiance became the title, based on another in-world book written about the Knights Radiant. And like we have snippets of The Way of Kings in The Way of Kings, we see excerpts of Words of Radiance in the actual book as epigraphs before chapters in part 3. And yes, that trend continues with Oathbringer, the third Stormlight Archive book, and Rhythm of War, the fourth one, both being named after in-world counterparts which appear in each. Now, at this point, I also want to take just a short detour to point something out in case anyone doesn't know. On top of being named after in-world books and also just having titles that I love, the acronyms for each Stormlight book so far almost match up to make a palindrome. So if the fifth book's initials are KOW, when it comes to the acronyms, we're just going to ignore the T that maybe should be in The Way of Kings, okay? Okay. Don't think too much about it. Then the first 5 books' acronyms will be symmetrical, which is both satisfying and relevant because of the in-world significance of symmetry. Hi, Editing Mark here. Brandon actually, in the time since I recorded this video, has made a comment on Facebook saying that Knights of Woeful Truth is the possible working title so far for Stormlight 5, so he is actually looking to keep that T in there, even though I was joking that he was going to ignore it. This doesn't really make a big difference to the video overall, but it's interesting to know, and that would be an interesting book to see in the universe of the Stormlight Archive as well. So I'm interested to see how that'll work out. Anyway, back to the video. You could say that that's another way that the titles are relevant to the story that they're telling, which is cool, but it's the fact that they exist in-world that really piques my interest. Because if the titles of each of the books are themselves taken from in-world books, is the title of the series also taken from something in-world? It's a simple question. The Way of Kings exists on Roshar, so does that mean there's also an in-world collection of books on Roshar called the Stormlight Archive? Part 2. Despite being kind of involved in the Cosmere fandom and having ideas about where I think certain plot threads or character arcs will go, I don't tend to come up with and post theories like some fans do. This is partly, maybe mostly, because I'm self-conscious that people will think my theories are stupid, but with this theory, it's not really of any great significance. I also haven't been able to find any evidence of other people theorizing about this, so I guess that takes some pressure off, or else it means that people aren't theorizing about it because they think it's a stupid idea. It's also not speculation about a major plot point or character. It's pretty much inconsequential to the story, but I still really want it to be true. And there is actually something to theorize about here. I think I hear my dog, wanting to get out, so I will be back. Oh shit. He is outside now, and hopefully his barks don't pick up on the microphone. For minor spoiler reasons that I won't specify, I don't think that there's a collection called the Stormlight Archive on Roshar yet. If Brandon does plan on having an in-world Stormlight Archive, then I think it stands to reason that it would include, at least in part, the in-world books that the actual books are named after. That means that each of the titles in our Stormlight Archive would correlate to an entry in the Rosharan in-world Stormlight Archive, and again, I just really like that idea. I need to let my dog in. Shit. What's going on here? I'm recording. No, over here, Mac. There's a dog here now. Good pooch. You're on camera. Okay, I'm gonna put him on my bed. Good boy. Good boy. My continuity is probably fucked because I think I kicked my tripod 3 times. It makes sense to me as an extension of what Brandon has already set up by naming his books after in-world books. In fact, I'm actually at a stage now where I think if in 30 years when I'm 55, I read the last Stormlight Archive book and the epilogue doesn't include someone in the Palanaeum in Carbranth placing gently a copy of the in-world book that the 10th Stormlight book is named after onto the shelves of the in-world Stormlight Archive, I might be genuinely disappointed. Don't get me wrong, I can absolutely see why some people might hate that, and it would be too meta, too much like a wink and a nudge at the camera. Who nudges a camera? But Brandon has set the precedent of each of the book's titles showing up in their own text, so will the Stormlight Archive show up in its own text, which is any of the books in it? I don't know. As I said, I'm not much of a theory crafter, so I wouldn't put too much stock in that, but I can dream. If it were the case that there was an in-world collection of books with this title, though, I would want it to have good in-world justification for existing. And to be fair, I'd trust Brandon to give it a good reason and not just put the Stormlight Archive into the Stormlight Archive because he did it with all the other titles. If I was to try to come up with a reason to back up why this would exist in-world, I would probably go simple and make it a collection of books relevant to the Knights Radiant. The Radiants are an organization who so far are key to the central plot of the books. And we've already seen more than one instance of the in-world books being tied to members of the Radiants. So that could make sense, but then again, Brandon has said that books 6 to 10 are less about the Radiants and more about another group. So I could be wrong, and if you think of a better reason for an in-world Stormlight Archive to exist, then feel free to theorize along with me in the comments. Part 3. I think that as someone who has read all of the so far released Stormlight books, which is up to book 4 at the time of recording, this isn't the question that I'm most excited to learn the answer to. There are huge things that have been set up in the first 4 books that could come to fruition in the next one, and I'm so excited to learn. But there's so much to these books that there are also plenty of tiny, almost insignificant details that I also want to see the end of. And I emphasize, almost insignificant. Hey, that's the name of this part. Because even if they don't make any difference to the fate of any characters or they don't affect the outcome of the plot at all, there's still so much value to those tiny pieces of the story that you might latch onto without even knowing why sometimes. They can make the world seem like it's really real, like there's life outside of the main characters. And that in turn can make the main characters' stories feel even more important because you care about the world as a whole. The Stormlight Archive books utilize this in a really cool way by showing you interludes including snippets of characters who have nothing to do with the plot in far off places that you would struggle to point out on a map of Roshar. Even though they're all printed at the front of the book. Like, come on, you don't know where Steen is? It's right there. It's right there. Steen. I can't wait for the novella set in Panathum. But the really amazing thing to me is that it doesn't end with the interludes or with the little nuggets of information that you get in the main chapters. It's so much more. The world feels so fleshed out to me, and literally every aspect of the book feels important and connected, from the most crucial plot points to the damn titles of the things. And when there's so much rich lore that even the title of the series could end up playing a small but a relevant part, that's just the pinnacle for me. Every aspect of the Stormlight Archive is open to reading, rereading, connecting with other books in the Cosmere, theorizing on, or just enjoying in your own way. And I know it can seem intimidating because of how much there is, but if you frame it less as being about knowing all of the vast parts of the book and more about having as much as possible to choose from, then you get to go and pick which part or parts you like the most and focus on them as much as you want. And that could be knowing everything about everything, or it could just be whether or not some fictional books get placed next to each other on a fictional shelf in a fictional library in a story that's released in 25 years' time. Thank you so much for watching this video. Like I said earlier, I don't tend to theorize publicly too much for fear of being discredited, ridiculed, and even killed for my beliefs of where certain Stormlight Archive character arcs are going. But at the same time, it wasn't too controversial and it wasn't too heavy on the theorizing either. I just couldn't find anyone else talking about the possibility of an in-world Stormlight Archive, so I just wanted to put that idea forward. Also, in my experience, the Cosmere fandom have actually been pretty nice, so let me just state for the record that I don't actually think any of them are going to kill me for any of my theories yet. If you like this video, please feel free to support the channel by liking, sharing, subscribing, or commenting, because it's lonely here on YouTube. I have made Stormlight videos before, or one at least, and you can check that out. Hopefully as well I'll have more in the future, because I am a big nerd for Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere, let me tell you. Thanks again for watching, and stay tuned for the totally real, 100% accurate epilogue to Stormlight 10.
Mark, the librarian in the Palladium, he had been given charge over a collection of books in regards to the last couple of years and all the stuff that went on with the Knights Radiant and all that stuff. And so it came to pass that Mark placed the final book, The Way of Kings, onto the shelf to complete his new collection that he had been tasked with curating. The name of this section? Well, he stood back and clapped his hands.
Wow,
Mark said.
I guess the real Stormlight Archive was the friends we made along the way.
And so it came to pass that all of the cool people who survived won the day, and all of those who died along the way came back to life for a huge party with lots of high-fiving and chowder and maybe some violet wine. Thus ends Book 10 of the Stormlight Archive.